Hello, my name is Jonathan Brenneman, and I'm a member of Christian Peacemaker Teams, and I work out of Hebron in the southern West Bank. At around the end of World War I, when the modern conflict really begins, Britain had control of the entire area. Palestinians, or Arabs, as you would recognize from the green, owned most of the land. Although Jews started moving in due to increased persecution throughout Europe. Now, this caused extra conflict, and Britain decided that they no longer wanted to deal with it and gave the problem over to the UN. The United Nations solution, it can be seen in map 2. In this one, Jews were given 53% of the land and Arabs 47%. Arabs rejected this plan because they were being asked to give up too much land, and there was a war, and Israel won, leading to what you see in map 3. Map 3 came about after Israel won their war for independence. And this continued until another war in 1967, in which Israel started a temporary military occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, this supposedly temporary occupation, Israel started bringing in Israeli citizens, placing them in the area that was supposed to be under Palestinian rule. This is what has caused what you can see in map 3, the disintegration of Palestinian land. Now, as Israel brought in settlers to settle this Arab land, usually they went to the outskirts of the cities. But in Hebron, the situation is quite different, which is one of the reasons why CPT decided to come to Hebron. In this map, you can see the 2 Israeli settlements on the outskirts of the city. This is quite normal. But also you have Israeli settlements within the main part of this city. Now, Hebron is the largest Palestinian city in the West Bank, but it was actually split into 2. You have H1, which is under Palestinian Authority rule, and H2, which is under Israeli military rule or martial law. And this is because in this area, which has 30,000 Palestinians living, there are 500 Jews living there as well, or Israeli citizens. Now, these Jewish settlements are actually scattered within this area. All of the pink that you see on the map are Jewish settlements. So the Israeli army had to figure out a way of securing those settlements, even though they're not one connected unit. And Israel has mostly attempted to do this through fear. One way that they do this is with checkpoints. These checkpoints are scattered throughout the H2 area of Hebron, to the point where a Palestinian would have to go through a checkpoint nearly any time they would leave their home. This includes the possibility of being searched by soldiers, always going through metal detectors, and having your bags searched. So it's basically like going through airport security anytime a Palestinian wants to leave their home. The picture you see on the screen was taken when a man was trying to get some of his goats out of the city, and they actually had to go through this checkpoint. So he had to try to maneuver them through this turnstile. One of the main reasons why Jews decided to settle within the actual city is because of the Ibrahimi Mosque. This is where it's believed that Abraham, the patriarch of both the Muslim and Jewish religions, is believed to be buried. But in the 90s, this mosque was actually integrated. This was until a Jewish settler came in and murdered 29 Palestinians. After that, a curfew was put on the Palestinians, and the mosque was split. That was in 1994. Palestinians today have to go through at least 1, if not 2 checkpoints, then a metal detector, then be searched by soldiers in order to get into the mosque. Israelis are able to walk down the street with their machine guns all the way up to the entrance, check them in with a soldier, and walk through 1 metal detector to get through. So really, the Arabs ended up being punished for the crime that one particular settler did. In this picture, you can see an example of settlers who still today are allowed to carry their weapons with them. This is This picture was taken directly across the street from the mosque. Also notice the barrier in this street. Israel has actually segregated certain streets that only Jews can drive on and Palestinians are only allowed to walk on, or streets that Palestinians aren't even allowed to do that. In this street you have the Palestinian side and you have the Israeli side. Notice, the Israeli side is paved. Cars can drive on that. It's painted. The Palestinian side has cracks in it, potholes, and all that they're allowed to do is walk on the street. Now, in order to keep Palestinians off some of these segregated streets, Israel has put up roadblocks. This roadblock is actually set up directly beside our house, which is located right here. It's actually so close that our neighbor, who used to be able to get out her front door and walk across the street to the cemetery, is now unable to do that because her front door, which was the only entrance or exit to her house, was welded shut so that she would not be allowed onto that street. So we actually knocked a hole in the wall separating our two apartments so she could walk out of our apartment. But still, to get across the street, she would have to walk out of our apartment, go back all the way around just to be able to get across the street. When Israelis attack, there is very little repercussion for them. But if Palestinians ever attack Israelis, the repercussions are extremely high. This is a picture of a Jewish woman attacking a Palestinian woman and her son actually kicking that woman. Now, this is quite common because Israeli children under the age of 14 cannot be prosecuted for any reason, while Palestinian children as young as 12 can be held in jail for nearly 2 years without a trial. And this is all just within the city of Hebron itself. In the hill country just south, they face an even more dire oppression. Within the South Hebron Hills are families that have been living there for generations. But in 1999, they were evicted by the Israeli army so that the army could use that land for a firing zone, basically to do weapons testing and military maneuvers. They were put on buses, some at a day's notice, with no compensation, and just dropped off. Their homes were destroyed, but 4 months later, they were able to win a court case and were allowed to return to their lands. By the way, this is a picture of me talking to some of the boys that live in that area. So they returned to their destroyed villages, but the military continued to use that land for practice, and Israel continued to have any rights over anything that was built. So if the Palestinians wanted to rebuild their homes, or fix up a cave to live in, or dig a water cistern so that they could have enough water to live on, or even build a toilet so they could go to the bathroom, they would have to ask Israel for permission, and Israel has never granted permission for those. But people need to drink water, people need places to live, people have to go to the bathroom. So they built solar panels, they built toilets, they fixed up caves, and they built water cisterns, all of which now have demolition orders on them. But still, the Palestinians raise their families. But again, Israel is still using this for a firing zone. And often they leave rockets just lying around. Here, some boys are showing me where they store the unexploded rockets that they find in a safe place. Today, Israel is again trying to kick these Palestinians off of their land. So, given these circumstances, what does peacemaking look like? We believe, in the words of Martin Luther King, that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but that it is the presence of justice. And given that framework, CPT has come up with this mission statement. CPT Palestine is a faith-based organization that supports Palestinian-led, nonviolent, grassroots resistance to the Israeli occupation and the unjust structures that uphold it. By collaborating with local Palestinian and Israeli peacemakers and educating people in our home communities, we help create a space for justice and peace. We support Palestinian-led peace initiatives. It is impossible for us to just come in and bring peace. It is the people living there that have to do it. What CPT attempts to do is just to create enough space that peace can start to blossom. And we do that through working with Palestinians, working with Israelis, and working with internationals to resist that unjust occupation. Because as long as there is inequality, there is no way that peace can be created. We also believe that all of this must be done non-violently, because violence only begets more violence. So what does this look like for Christian Peacemaker Team on a day-to-day basis? In the morning, CPT does what we call school patrols, which is basically going to the checkpoint where Palestinian school children have to walk through every day and have Israeli soldiers with their guns stop them and sometimes search through their bags. We're there monitoring, making sure that children aren't being stopped or that teachers aren't being stopped and turned back, making sure that children's bags aren't getting searched. We had one incident where a teacher was actually stopped 3 separate times just to make him late for work. Another thing that we do is that we monitor settler tours. This is where Israeli settlers will guide tours through the Palestinian parts of town, telling other Israelis about how important it is that Israel takes that city back over. The settlers sometimes get rowdy and even harass shopkeepers or Palestinians walking by. This is very scary for children because there's usually quite a few soldiers around the outside of the tours protecting those settlers. As we try to protect the Palestinians. So we will stand between settlers and shops where the settlers might want to go in and vandalize those shops, knocking over the goods that the Palestinians are trying to sell. Whenever we see soldiers out and about, we'll follow them and see what they're up to. On this particular day, the soldiers created a flying checkpoint and started stopping Palestinian cars at random. We're also always on call. On this particular day, some Palestinians called us because their house is so close to the Israeli settlement that some settlers actually sprayed water from their kitchen into this Palestinian family's bedroom. So we investigate that and see if there are any ways that we can help. We're also part of a few campaigns, one of which is the El Rajabi building. This is a building that Israeli settlers claim to have bought. You'll notice the Israeli flags along the building. Israeli settlers claim to have bought it and actually for a while moved in and were extremely violent to Palestinians around. There was even one incident where a settler ran over a Palestinian girl in her car. But the courts ruled that the settlers had to leave until a further ruling happened, and so CPT goes there and monitors and makes sure that the settlers aren't coming back. And we're also working with the Palestinian lawyers to see how we can help in the case. For example, they asked us to interview some of the neighbors around the house about the abuses that they received the last time the settlers were there. And also just living life with the Palestinians. We go down to the South Hebron Hills into the firing zone and we stay overnight with the families there and we hear their stories. This child showed us around to different places where rockets had fallen and actually showed us an explosives case that was made in America. And we take part in nonviolent direct actions along with other international groups and with Palestinians themselves. This is one specific case where we were challenging Israel in the firing zone. And I love this picture because I think it very clearly demonstrates the David and Goliath battle that's going on. You have a Palestinian with a flag on the back of his bike and an Israeli police vehicle. This military vehicle, by the way, is probably paid for by the U.S. The U.S. actually provides 20% of the funding for the Israeli military. Now, all of this work that Christian Peacemaker Team does, I think, is in line with the peacemaking example of Christ, who started his ministry with this quote from Isaiah. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Christian Peacemaker Teams is in Palestine, hoping to bring release to the captives, hoping to help the oppressed go free, and we believe that the best way to do this is not through military might, but through exposing what is happening there. For more information, you can check out CPT at their website. If you would like to follow my blog, I would more than welcome that. Or if you have any more questions, please email me.